Have you ever had someone try to fix something in your life that wasn't broken? That's what happened to me last summer when my well-meaning but technologically challenged family decided my smartphone addiction needed an intervention. What they didn't realize was that in our digital world, going analog isn't just inconvenient, it can backfire in spectacular ways. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I'm Rebecca Wilson, and this is how I went from being forced to use a flip phone for my own good to deliberately changing all my banking passwords, setting off a financial chaos that my family never saw coming. The first sign of trouble came during our annual Wilson family reunion at Lake Tahoe. Picture this: a dozen cabins clustered around a pristine mountain lake, spotty cell service, and 3 generations of my family ready to reconnect with nature for 2 whole weeks. For most of them, that meant fishing, hiking, and telling the same stories around the campfire year after year. For me, it meant carefully rationing my phone battery to maintain my sanity. Rebecca, would you please put that thing away? Your grandfather is talking, my mother hissed during our first dinner together. I looked up from my screen, where I had been discreetly checking work emails. As a junior partner at Donaldson & Myers Financial Advisors, I couldn't just disappear for 2 weeks, especially not during quarter-end reporting. Sorry, Mom, I muttered, sliding my phone under my thigh. The Preston account needs— What those accounts need is for you to take a break, my father interjected, passing a bowl of mashed potatoes with unnecessary force. You're going to burn out before you're 35. I was 32, thank ye. You very much, and the only thing burning was my patience. But I smiled tightly and nodded, determined to be the bigger person. After all, I only needed to survive 14 days of family togetherness before I could return to my apartment in Chicago and my wonderfully independent adult life. That night, I retreated to my cabin's tiny porch to catch up on work. The light from my phone illuminated the wooden railings as I scrolled through spreadsheets, occasionally swatting at mosquitoes that seemed determined to carry me off into the woods. The familiar ping of incoming messages was oddly comforting against the backdrop of cricket chirps and distant laughter from the main cabin. A shadow fell across my screen. Working again, Becca. I looked up to find my cousin Ethan leaning against the porch railing. With his flannel shirt and perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, he looked like he belonged in these woods. I, in my silk pajamas and with my sleek phone, decidedly did not. Some of us have responsibilities, Ethan, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Ethan had inherited his father's construction business 3 years ago, and now spent his days building custom cabins across 3 states. Somehow he managed to take off weeks at a time without the world ending. And some of us have perspective. He sat down beside me, stretching his long legs out in front of him. You know, before smartphones, people actually managed to go on vacation without bringing their offices with them. I rolled my eyes. Before smartphones, financial advisors had to carry briefcases full of paperwork. Would you prefer I spread quarterly reports all over the dining table instead? I'd prefer you remember how to exist without that thing attached to your hand. He nodded toward my phone. When was the last time you went a day without it? The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. College, maybe? No, even then I'd had my phone. High school? That couldn't be right. Exactly, Ethan said, taking my silence as confirmation. It's like you've forgotten how to just be. I haven't forgotten how to be, I snapped. I'm being, right now. I'm being a responsible adult with a career that requires constant attention. No, you're being available 24/7 to people who wouldn't give you the same courtesy. Ethan stood up, his expression softening. Just think about it, okay? You're missing out on more than you realize. After he left, I tried to focus on work again, But his words kept echoing in my head. Was I really that dependent on my phone? Sure, I checked it frequently, but who didn't these days? It wasn't an addiction. It was modern life. When I finally crawled into bed that night, I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. If I could get 2 hours of work done before breakfast, maybe I could actually enjoy some family time without the constant anxiety of falling behind. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds rather than my alarm. Confused, I reached for my phone on the nightstand, only to find nothing but empty wood. I sat up, suddenly alert. Had it fallen? I checked under the bed, between the sheets, even in the bathroom. Nothing. Someone had taken my phone. I threw on a sweatshirt over my pajamas and stormed toward the main cabin, where smoke was already rising from the chimney despite the early hour. Inside, I found my parents, my Aunt Linda and Uncle Roger, and my grandfather huddled around the kitchen table, like conspirators. "Where's my phone?" I demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me, but only my mother had the decency to look guilty. "Rebecca, honey, we need to talk," she began. "No, we don't. I need my phone back. Now." My father cleared his throat. "We've been concerned about you for a while now, Becca. Your attachment to that device has become problematic." "Problematic?" I echoed. "What is this, an intervention?" Aunt Linda nodded earnestly. "That's exactly what it is, dear. We're worried about how disconnected you've become. The irony of being called disconnected because I used technology to stay connected was apparently lost on her." "This is ridiculous," I said, running a hand through my tangled hair. "I'm 32 years old. You can't just take my property." "We're not taking it permanently," my mother assured me. "Just for the duration of the reunion. Think of it as a digital detox." I laughed incredulously. "A digital detox? Mom, I have clients depending on me. I have responsibilities." "You've made arrangements for your absence," my father pointed out. "Your out-of-office message clearly states that Taylor will handle any urgent matters." Taylor was my assistant, and yes, technically she could handle basic client inquiries. But there were accounts that only I managed, strategies that only I understood fully. "This isn't up for debate," my grandfather finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of his 82 years. "In my day, people talked to each other face to face. They looked each other in the eye. Now everyone's walking around with their noses buried in those screens. Grandpa, with all due respect, your day didn't have global financial markets that operate 24/7, and people were happier for it," he retorted. I looked from face to face, searching for an ally and finding none. Even Ethan, who had joined us during the conversation, stood with his arms crossed, clearly on their side. "Fine," I said, feeling cornered. "Keep the phone, but I need my laptop for work." The uncomfortable glances exchanged around the table told me everything. "You took my laptop too?" My voice rose an octave. "Are you kidding me?" "It's just for 2 weeks," my mother said soothingly. "Dr. Reynolds says a complete break is the most effective approach." Who's Dr. Reynolds?" "He's a digital addiction specialist," Aunt Linda explained. "He has a wonderful TED Talk about reconnecting with reality." I had to physically restrain myself from screaming. They'd consulted some internet quack about my supposed addiction without even talking to me first? "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, struggling to keep my tone civil. "Twiddle my thumbs for 2 weeks while my career implodes?" My father reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver flip phone. "You can use this for emergencies," he said, holding it out to me. "It makes calls and can send basic text messages. That should be sufficient." I stared at the outdated device as if he were offering me a rotary phone or a carrier pigeon. "You can't be serious." "We're very serious," my mother said. "We love you, Rebecca, and we're worried about you. This constant connectivity isn't healthy." "For simplicity," my grandfather added, nodding toward the flip phone. Sometimes simpler is better. I snatched the phone from my father's hand, fighting the urge to throw it into the lake. Instead, I turned on my heel and stalked back to my cabin, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Inside, I examined my new phone. It was a basic track phone with tactile buttons that clicked when pressed and a tiny screen that displayed pixelated text. The kind of phone that belonged in a museum, not in the hands of a financial professional in 2025. For an hour, I paced my cabin, alternating between rage and panic. Without my devices, I was cut off from my clients, my colleagues, my friends, my entire life. How was I supposed to survive 2 weeks in technological purgatory? Around mid-morning, a knock at my door interrupted my spiral of anxiety. It was Ethan, holding a mug of coffee and wearing an expression that mixed sympathy with stubborn resolve. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering the mug. "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." I accepted it wordlessly and stepped aside to let him in. The cabin felt smaller with him in it, or maybe that was just the walls of digital withdrawal closing in. "They mean well," he said after a moment. "They've lost their minds," I corrected him, taking a gulp of coffee. "Do you have any idea what this could do to my career? My clients expect immediate responses. In my industry, being unreachable for 2 weeks is professional suicide." Ethan settled into the room's only armchair. "Taylor has your work covered. I called her this morning to make sure." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You what?" she said, and I quote, "Tell Rebecca to relax for once in her life. I've got this." He had the audacity to look amused. "She also said she'd email your most important clients to let them know you're on a family retreat with limited connectivity." The thought of Taylor contacting my clients directly made my stomach clench, but I had to admit it was a reasonable solution. She was competent, if not as detail-oriented as I preferred. "This is still completely inappropriate," I said, but some of the fight had gone out of me. "You don't stage an intervention for someone who's just doing their job." "It's not about doing your job, Becca. It's about how you do everything else. Or rather, how you don't." Ethan leaned forward. "When was the last time you had a conversation without checking your phone? When was the last time you sat through a family meal without excusing yourself to take a call? Hell, when was the last time you went for a walk without photographing every scenic view for Instagram?" His questions stung because they weren't entirely unfair. Yes, I checked my phone frequently. Yes, I sometimes took work calls during family gatherings. But that was life in 2025. Everyone did it. So I'm supposed to just, what? Pretend it's 1995 for the next 2 weeks? You're supposed to be present, to reconnect with the people who love you, to remember there's a world beyond that screen. He gestured toward the window, where sunlight dappled the pine trees surrounding the cabin. "Maybe even have a little fun." I sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted despite the caffeine. "I don't even remember how to do that anymore," I admitted quietly. Something in Ethan's expression softened. "That's why we're here, to remind you." For the rest of that day, I grudgingly participated in family activities. We went fishing on the Yao Lake. I caught nothing. Played board games. I lost spectacularly at Monopoly, and helped prepare a massive outdoor dinner. I burned the corn on the cob. By evening, my fingers had stopped reflexively reaching for a phone that wasn't there, though the phantom sensation of missing notifications still prickled at my consciousness. It wasn't until I was getting ready for bed that night that a rebellious thought took root. They wanted me to use a flip phone for simplicity. Fine. I would show them just how simple my life could become without proper technology. The next morning, I approached my father at breakfast with the flip phone in hand and an innocent expression on my face. "Dad, how do I check my bank account? On this thing?" I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. He looked up from his pancakes, confusion evident. You don't. It's not a smartphone. So how am I supposed to monitor my finances? Transfer money to pay my rent? Make sure my credit card bills are paid on time? Well, he stammered, clearly having not considered this aspect. I suppose you'll have to use a computer at some point. But you've confiscated my laptop, I reminded him sweetly. And the nearest public library is 40 minutes away. My mother interjected, Honey, surely your bills can wait until after the reunion. Can they? I widened my eyes. My rent is due next week, and I was planning to move some money around for that investment property I mentioned. You know, the one that's closing at the end of the month? Time-sensitive stuff. The mention of real estate got my grandfather's attention. He owned several rental properties and considered himself something of a mogul in our small hometown. What kind of property? A duplex in Lincoln Park, I said, naming one of Chicago's most desirable neighborhoods. 7% cap rate, and the seller is motivated, but the earnest money needs to be transferred by Monday. This was all true, though I had already arranged the transfer before leaving Chicago. They didn't need to know that. My father frowned. Well, I suppose you could use my laptop for banking purposes only. Supervised, of course. That seems reasonable, I agreed, suppressing a smile. I'll need to reset some of my passwords first. Security protocols require changes every 30 days, and I'm due for updates. He nodded, seemingly relieved that I was being cooperative. After breakfast, then. That's how, less than 24 hours after being forced into digital detox, I found myself sitting at the dining table with my father's laptop open in front of me and a plan forming in my mind. Don't mind me, I said cheerfully as I navigated to my bank's website. This will just take a few minutes. What my family didn't realize, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that my digital life was a carefully calibrated ecosystem. Every password, every account, every automatic payment was interconnected in a complex web that I'd designed for maximum efficiency. By forcing me onto a flip phone and restricting my access, they had effectively thrown a wrench into that system. So, I decided to throw one right back, one by one. I changed the passwords to my banking apps, my investment accounts, my credit cards, and my bill payment portals. Each new password was a random string of characters, impossible to remember, impossible to guess. Normally, I would have saved these in my password manager, which was, of course, on my confiscated phone and laptop. All done, I announced brightly, closing the browser windows before anyone could see what I'd been doing. Everything's taken care of. See? That wasn't so hard, my father said, patting my shoulder. You don't need to be constantly connected to handle your affairs. You're absolutely right, Dad, I agreed, my smile never wavering. Simplicity is best. What I didn't tell him was that I had just ensured that when I returned to Chicago, I would be completely locked out of every financial account I owned. Without my original devices to authenticate the new passwords, I would have no way to access my money, pay my bills, or manage my investments. It was the nuclear option, but desperate times called for desperate measures. If they wanted to see the consequences of forcing someone to disconnect in a digital world, they were about to get a front row seat. That afternoon, as we gathered for a hike around the lake, I felt a strange mix of guilt and vindication. Perhaps this intervention really did come from a place of love. Perhaps I did spend too much time on my devices. But forcing me to disconnect wasn't the answer, not when my entire professional and financial life depended on that connectivity. The flip phone weighed heavily in my pocket, a constant reminder of the chaos I had just set in motion. My family thought they were teaching me a lesson about simplicity. Little did they know, I was about to teach them one about unintended consequences. And as we walked along the shore of Lake Tahoe, the sun glinting off the water and the ancient pines towering overhead, I found myself wondering who would learn the bigger lesson in the end. The Wilson family hiking expedition ended at a scenic overlook, where the vastness of Lake Tahoe spread before us like a sapphire blanket. My cousin's children raced around, their laughter carried by the mountain breeze, while the adults settled onto benches and rocks to catch their breath. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Uncle Roger said, gesturing toward the panorama. I nodded, genuinely struck by the view. "It really is." "And not a single person has taken a photo," he observed with satisfaction. "We're just experiencing it." The pointed comment wasn't lost on me, but I bit back a retort. Let them think they were winning. The flip phone in my pocket represented a temporary defeat, but I had planted the seeds for a much larger victory. One that would demonstrate exactly why staying connected wasn't just a convenience, but a necessity. That evening, my cousin Meredith organized a talent show in the main cabin. Each family had to perform something: a song, a skit, a magic trick. Anything to entertain the group. My immediate family had always opted for a musical number, with my father on guitar, my mother singing, and me reluctantly harmonizing. "We'll do Sweet Caroline," my father announced, pulling his guitar from its case. "Rebecca, you'll take the high parts like always." I hadn't sung with my parents since Christmas 3 years ago. The realization was oddly sobering. Had it really been that long? As we huddled in a corner to practice, my mother's voice, still, strong despite her 62 years, blended with my father's rougher baritone. When it came time for my part, I hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. "I don't remember the harmonies," I admitted. My mother's expression softened. "Just follow my lead, honey. It'll come back to you." And surprisingly, it did. As we performed for our extended family, the familiar melody unlocked muscle memories I didn't know I still possessed. For 4 minutes, I wasn't thinking about work, or my digital protest, or the financial chaos I'd set in motion. I was simply singing with my parents, soaking in the applause and catcalls from relatives who had known me my entire life. The strange thing was, I enjoyed it. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight streaming through thin curtains and the distant sound of a motorboat on the lake. No alarm, no notifications, no immediate urge to check emails, just the simple rhythm of a day beginning in the mountains. I reached for the flip phone, checking for messages out of habit. There was one text from Taylor. "All good at the office. Breathe." Despite my rebellion, I felt a flicker of gratitude. Perhaps Taylor was more capable than I'd given her credit for. My father's laptop was available to me each morning after breakfast, supervised as promised. I would diligently check my accounts, ostensibly managing my finances, but actually ensuring that my digital trap was properly set. I changed a few more passwords each day, always using unique combinations of characters that I immediately forgot. I also sent several emails to my building management, my bank, and my investment broker, explaining that I would be completely unreachable for the duration of my vacation and to hold all non-urgent matters. What I didn't tell my family was that I had also activated two-factor authentication on everything. Authentication that would be sent to my confiscated smartphone, not the flip phone they'd provided. Each day that passed was another knot in a digital Gordian knot that would be nearly impossible to untangle without my original devices. By the 5th day, something unexpected began to happen. I stopped reaching for my missing phone every few minutes. The phantom vibrations in my pocket faded. During family card games or fishing expeditions, I found myself fully engaged in the activity rather than half present, half elsewhere. "You're actually getting better at rummy," my grandfather noted one rainy afternoon as I laid down a sequence of cards. "Maybe I'm just paying attention now," I conceded. He harumphed, but I caught the pleased glint in his eyes. That night, a thunderstorm rolled through the mountains, rattling the windows of my cabin and illuminating the interior with flashes of lightning. In Chicago, I would have spent such a night with Netflix and takeout, the storm nothing more than background noise to my climate-controlled existence. Here, with nothing but a paperback mystery I'd found on the cabin's bookshelf, I found myself transfixed by nature's display. Each thunderclap, each bolt of lightning felt immediate and awesome in the original sense of the word. Inspiring awe. I stepped onto the porch, protected from the rain by the overhanging roof, and simply watched. The lake churned with whitecaps, the surrounding pines swayed dramatically, and the air smelled of ozone and wet earth. It was beautiful, undeniably so, and I had no urge to capture it on camera or share it online. The experience existed solely, for me, in that moment. When Ethan found me there an hour later, I was still watching the storm, wrapped in a blanket and nursing a mug of tea. "Storm chaser now?" he asked, joining me on the porch swing. Apparently. I offered him a corner of my blanket, which he accepted, our shoulders touching in the chill air. I can't remember the last time I just watched a storm. "Welcome back to the real world," he said softly. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of the swing matching the pattering of rain on the roof. It felt strangely intimate, this shared experience without the barrier of screens between us. "You know," he said eventually. "When we were kids, you were the adventurous one, always climbing the highest tree, jumping into the deepest part of the lake, leading expeditions into the woods." I smiled at the memory. "The Great Tahoe Explorer, you all called me. What happened to her?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the storm clouds above us. What had happened to that fearless girl? Where had she gone? "Life, I guess," I finally answered. "Responsibilities, career, adult stuff." Ethan's laugh was gentle, lacking any judgment. "Adult stuff is just kid stuff with consequences." I pondered this as lightning flashed again, illuminating his profile. The strong jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Had it really been that long since I'd really looked, at my cousin? "I'm still mad about the phone," I said, breaking the moment. "I know." And the intervention was completely inappropriate. Probably. But I might admit that being forced to disconnect hasn't been entirely terrible. He bumped my shoulder with his. "That's big of you, Becca." "Don't push it, Ethan." We laughed, and something tight in my chest loosened slightly. The storm continued to rage, but here on this porch, with family nearby and no digital distractions, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Of course, beneath that peace churned a calculated chaos of my own making. Every morning when I checked my accounts on my father's laptop, I was reminded of the digital time bomb I'd activated. Each password change, each authentication request sent to my inaccessible phone, each urgent email deferred. All of it would culminate in a financial nightmare the moment I returned to Chicago. Part of me felt guilty about the trouble it would cause. My parents, my grandfather, they truly believed they were helping me. Their methods were misguided, heavy-handed, and frankly infantilizing, but their intentions were good. But another part, the part that had been forced into this simplicity, remained. Resolute. They needed to understand that in 2025, disconnecting wasn't just inconvenient, it could be catastrophic. My career, my finances, my very life was built on a digital infrastructure they had thoughtlessly disrupted. As the reunion entered its second week, I found myself caught between two worlds. In one, I was rediscovering simple pleasures. Morning swims in the cold lake, marathon Scrabble tournaments, helping my younger cousins build elaborate sandcastles on the shore. In the other, I was silently orchestrating a demonstration of digital dependency that would make my point in the most dramatic way possible. "You seem different," my mother observed as we prepared dinner together one evening. She was chopping vegetables while I marinated chicken for the grill. "Different how?" I asked cautiously. "More present. More like yourself. Your old self, I mean." She paused her chopping to look at me. "Do you remember how you used to help me cook when you were little, standing on a chair to reach the counter? I did remember vaguely. Sunday afternoons in our kitchen, classical music playing on the radio, an actual radio, not a streaming service, and the smell of onions sautéing in butter. I guess I haven't made much time for cooking lately, I admitted. Or for family, she added quietly. The comment stung because it contained a kernel of truth. The last few Christmases, I'd flown in on the 24th and out on the 26th, citing work, commitments. Last Easter, I'd skipped the family gathering entirely to finish a major client proposal. Even my weekly calls home had become shorter, more distracted. I'm busy, Mom. My career is important, I know. She resumed chopping with more force than necessary. But at what cost, Rebecca? You've built this successful life, but who are you sharing it with? I had no good answer for that. My dating life consisted of app-arranged meetings that rarely led to second dates. My friendships had dwindled to occasional happy hours with colleagues. Even my beautifully designed apartment sometimes felt more like a hotel room than a home. That night. As a nearly full moon rose over the lake, I sat alone on my cabin porch, turning the flip phone over in my hands. The device represented everything I resented about this forced vacation: the presumption, the control, the rejection of my adult autonomy. Yet somewhere between the talent show and the thunderstorm, something had shifted. I was sleeping better, laughing more, noticing details I would have missed while absorbed in my screen: the specific pattern of birdsong in the morning, the changing colors of the lake throughout the day, the subtle dynamics between family members I'd known all my life but rarely observed closely. Was it possible they were right? Not about the intervention, that still rankled, but about my need to disconnect? To remember there was a world beyond my digital existence? I flipped the phone open and closed several times, its satisfying snap a relic of a simpler technological era. Then I made a decision. I would maintain my digital protest. They needed to understand the real consequences of forcing someone offline in today's interconnected world. But I would also try, really try, to embrace the remainder of this reunion with an open mind. Maybe there was a middle path between their enforced simplicity and my all-consuming connectivity. Maybe, just maybe, we all had something to learn as I tucked the flip phone back into my pocket. A text message arrived, a rare occurrence on this limited device. It was from Taylor again. Client emergency. Call the office ASAP. And just like that, my temporary peace shattered. The real world was calling, and this time, a flip phone wouldn't be enough to answer. Client emergency. Call office ASAP. The text from Taylor glowed on the tiny screen of my flip phone. 7 words that yanked me back into the world I'd been forced to abandon. My heart rate instantly doubled as worst-case scenarios flooded my mind. The Preston account collapsing, the Miyamoto portfolio tanking, the Henderson trust dispersal being challenged. Any number of financial catastrophes could be unfolding while I sat on a porch in the mountains, cut off from my professional lifeline. I immediately dialed the office number, my fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar keypad. The connection was spotty, dropping in and out as I paced the small confines of my cabin. Donaldson and Myers Financial, Taylor speaking. Taylor, it's Rebecca. What's going on? Rebecca. Thank God. We have a situation with the Vanderworth account. The Vanderworths were new clients, a wealthy couple in their 60s who had entrusted me with their retirement portfolio just 2 months ago. Their combined assets topped $8 million, making them some of our highest value clients. What kind of situation? I asked, my free hand clenching into a fist. They received an offer to invest in a limited partnership for a commercial development in Nashville. High yield, time sensitive. They need guidance by tomorrow morning or they lose their spot. In the investment world, high yield, time sensitive, often translated to high risk pressure tactic. Classic red flags. Have they sent over the prospectus? Yes, but Taylor hesitated. It's complicated. Mr. Sullivan asked me to get you on a video call to discuss it together. The Vanderworths are expecting our recommendation by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Mr. Sullivan was the founding partner of our firm and rarely involved himself in day-to-day client matters. If he was asking for me personally, the situation was serious. I can't do video on this phone, I said, frustration mounting. And my family has confiscated my laptop. What? Why would they do that? It's a long story. Look, can you set up a regular conference call instead? And email me the prospectus? I can use my father's computer to review it. I'll arrange it right away. Conference call in 1 hour? Make it 30 minutes. And Taylor, thank you for handling things while I've been away. After ending the call, I marched to the main cabin, where most of my family was gathered for a board game marathon. My father was in the midst of a heated Monopoly battle with my younger cousins. Dad, I need to use your laptop. Now, it's a work emergency. He looked up, clearly annoyed at the interruption. Rebecca, we agreed. This isn't about me checking email or scrolling social media, I cut in. The Vanderworths, clients with an $8 million portfolio, are about to make a potentially terrible investment decision unless I intervene. People's retirement savings are at stake. My mother, who had been reading in the corner, set down her book. Surely someone else at your firm can handle it. They're asking for me specifically. I built their financial plan. I know their risk tolerance, their goals, their concerns. I fixed my gaze on my father. Dad, you wouldn't let someone else operate? On your patients. This is no different. The mention of his surgical practice struck home. My father was a dedicated orthopedic surgeon who had often been called away from family events for emergency surgeries. He, of all people, should understand professional obligation. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. 30 minutes, in my cabin where I can monitor. The situation might require longer, I countered. And I need privacy for client confidentiality. We compromised on 1 hour, unsupervised, with my father's stern warning. Financial matters only, Rebecca. I'm trusting you. In his cabin, I immediately logged into my work email using the web browser. The Vanderworth prospectus was waiting, along with conference call details. I downloaded the 60-page document and began scanning it with practiced efficiency. As I suspected, the investment opportunity was problematic. The Nashville development boasted unrealistic projected returns, vague information about the principals involved, and concerning fine print about investor liability. Classic warning signs of either a poorly conceived project or, worse, a sophisticated scam targeting wealthy retirees. When the conference call began, I was armed with highlighted passages and specific questions. The guaranteed returns are a major red flag, I explained to Mr. Sullivan and Taylor. No real estate investment can guarantee 12% annually, especially in the current market. Exactly my concern, Mr. Sullivan agreed. His voice, still commanding even in his 70s, crackled through the flip phone's tiny speaker. The Vanderworths are dazzled by the numbers. They need to hear this from you, Rebecca. You've established trust with them. I can call them directly. After we wrap up here, I offered. Good. And Rebecca? Glad to hear you're still sharp even on vacation. Taylor tells me you've been completely off the grid. Not by choice, I muttered, glancing at the flip phone. After the call ended, I dialed the Vanderworths and spent 20 minutes explaining why their golden opportunity was fool's gold. By the time I finished, Mrs. Vanderworth was thanking me profusely for saving us from ourselves. It was nearly dinner time when I finally closed the laptop. Despite the circumstances, a familiar satisfaction hummed through me. This problem-solving, this protection of clients from financial missteps was why I became an advisor in the first place. Not for the salary or the status, but for moments like this when my expertise made a tangible difference in people's lives. As I walked back to the main cabin, where delicious smells indicated dinner preparations were underway, I felt conflicted. The work emergency had reinforced my belief that staying connected wasn't just a personal preference but a professional necessity. Yet I couldn't deny that the past week of forced disconnection had given me something valuable too. A perspective I'd been missing. My mother was at the stove when I entered, stirring a pot of her famous wild mushroom soup. "Everything sorted with your clients?" she asked, not looking up. "Yes." Crisis averted. "Good." She tasted the soup, added a pinch of something. "You know, your father used to be just like you. Constantly on call, rushing off to the hospital at all hours. It took a health scare when you were in high school to make him reevaluate. This was news to me." "What health scare?" "Stress-induced arrhythmia. The cardiologist told him he was working himself into an early grave." She set down her spoon and turned to face me. "That's when he started setting boundaries, hiring more partners, to share the on-call rotation, taking real vacations, like this one." I vaguely remembered a period when my father had been home more, when he'd started teaching tennis on weekends and actually attending my school events. I'd attributed it to normal career evolution, not a medical warning. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "He didn't want you to worry. And later, well," she gestured vaguely. "It never seemed relevant. Until now." The implication was clear. My family saw my constant connectivity as a parallel to my father's former workaholic tendencies. Their intervention, however misguided, came from genuine concern. That night, as family chatter filled the dining room, I found myself watching my father with new eyes. He was animated, relaxed, fully engaged in conversation with his brother about some fishing technique. No phone in sight, no distraction, just complete presence in the moment. Was that what I was missing? What all my devices and alerts and constant availability were costing me? After dinner, I volunteered to help my youngest cousin, Zoe, with her contribution to the family scrapbook. At 9, she was earnestly creating a page for each family unit, complete with hand-drawn illustrations and carefully printed captions. "Aunt Rebecca, what should I draw for your page?" she asked, crayons poised. The question caught me off guard. What visual would represent my life? My Chicago apartment? My office? My constant companion? The smartphone that was currently locked away? "Maybe the lake?" I suggested. "I've always loved swimming here." Zoe nodded seriously and began sketching a blue expanse with tiny figures swimming. "That's you," she said, pointing to a stick figure with long brown hair. "And that's Ethan teaching you to dive again." "Again?" "Mom said you used to be a really good diver, but you forgot how." Out of the mouths of babes. I had indeed forgotten how to dive, literally and perhaps metaphorically too. Forgotten how to fully immerse myself in experiences without digital documentation, forgotten how to take risks without calculating every variable, forgotten how to simply be instead of constantly doing. The next morning dawned misty and cool, the lake shrouded in fog that would burn off by midday. I rose early, before the rest of the family, and stood at the water's edge in my swimsuit, watching the silhouettes of trees emerge from the whiteness. "Morning, Becca." I turned to find Ethan approaching, a towel slung over his shoulder. Like, me? He wore a swimsuit, his intention clear. "You're going in?" I asked, eyeing the chilly water. "It's freezing." "Best time to swim." He dropped his towel on the dock. "You used to think so too." Without further discussion, he executed a perfect dive into the lake, barely creating a ripple. He surfaced several yards out, water streaming from his hair. "Coming?" I hesitated, then stepped onto the dock. The wooden planks were cool and slightly damp under my feet. "I don't remember how to dive," I admitted. "Sure you do. It's like riding a bike." "I haven't been on a bike in years either," he laughed. "Just try. Worst case, you belly flop and I promise not to laugh too hard." I stood it, The edge, arms raised in the starting position I'd learned at summer camp decades ago. My body remembered this. The preparatory tension, the slight bend of the knees. But my mind was racing with calculations. Angle of entry, depth of water, temperature shock. "Stop thinking," Ethan called. "Just do it." And suddenly, I was tired of thinking, tired of calculating, tired of second-guessing. I bent my knees, pushed off, and arced through the air before slicing into the lake with surprisingly little splash. The cold was a shock, instantly awakening every nerve ending. For a moment, all mental chatter ceased, replaced by pure physical sensation. The pressure of water, the contrast between air and liquid, the primitive instinct to surface and breathe. When I broke through, gasping and laughing, Ethan was grinning at me. "Told you, the Great Tahoe Explorer returns." We swam parallel to the shore, matching stroke for stroke as the mist parted around us. There was something primal and satisfying about moving through water, powered only by my body, surrounded by the vastness of the lake and mountains. Later, wrapped in towels on the dock as the sun finally broke through, Ethan broached the subject we'd both been avoiding. "The phone thing was heavy-handed," he conceded. "They should have talked to you first." "Yes," I agreed. "They should have." But the concern behind it was real. "We've all noticed how you've changed over the years, how work has consumed you." I pulled my towel tighter. "My career is important to me. No one's disputing that. It's the balance that's off." He turned to face me. "When you helped the Vanderwerths yesterday, that was you using technology as a tool. But most of the time, Becca, it feels like the technology is using you." His words hit with unexpected force. Was that true? Had I crossed the line from using digital tools to being controlled by them? I thought about the constant notifications, the Pavlovian response I'd developed to every ping and vibration, the way I checked my phone first thing in the morning and last thing at night, the anxiety I felt when my battery dipped below 20%. "I might have some work to do on boundaries," I conceded. "We all do." He nudged my shoulder with his. "The difference is the rest of us are trying. You've been resistant. Because I'm an adult. Because I get to decide how I live my life." "Absolutely. But deciding implies choice, Becca. Have you actually been choosing your relationship with technology? Or just sliding into patterns without questioning them?" Again, his insight was uncomfortably accurate. When had I last evaluated my digital habits? When had I last set intentional boundaries around work and connectivity? The final days of the reunion passed in a blur of activities. A fishing competition, which my grandfather won to no one's surprise. A night hike to stargaze far from light pollution. A massive family barbecue where 3 generations of Wilsons crowded around picnic tables, swapping stories and laughter. Through it all, I felt the growing weight of my digital deception. Each morning, I dutifully checked my accounts on my father's laptop, maintaining the charade while continuing to sabotage my own digital access. The flip phone remained a constant presence in my pocket, a symbol of both my family's overreach and my own rebellion. But something else was growing too, a recognition that both extremes were flawed. My family's forced digital detox was paternalistic and unrealistic, yes, but my own all-or-nothing approach to connectivity had costs I'd been unwilling to acknowledge. On our final night, as we gathered around a bonfire on the beach, my grandfather raised his mug of hot chocolate in a toast. "To family," he said simply. "The most important connection of all." Mugs clinked, voices echoed the sentiment, and as I looked around the circle of fire-lit faces, some I'd known my entire life, others newer additions through marriage and birth, I felt a certainty that transcended my professional identity and digital dependencies. These people, annoying as they could be, were my foundation, my history, my constant. No password could lock them away. No screen could adequately capture their significance. Tomorrow, we would all drive back to our separate lives. I would return to Chicago, to my career, to the digital chaos I'd engineered. The aftermath of my password changes would unfold exactly as I'd planned, a demonstration of how essential connectivity was in today's world. But as sparks spiraled upward into the star-filled sky, I made a silent promise to myself. When the dust settled, when my point was made, I would find a middle path. A way to remain connected professionally without sacrificing personal presence. A balance between the digital efficiency I valued and the analog experiences I'd rediscovered. My family had forced simplicity upon me. I had responded with calculated complications. But perhaps we were all circling the same truth from different directions. That a well-lived life required both complexity and simplicity, both connection and disconnection, both doing and being. The flip phone weighed in my pocket. Outdated, inadequate, frustrating. Yet somehow in these 2 weeks it had helped me reclaim parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. Tomorrow would bring chaos. Tonight, under the vast Sierra sky with family surrounding me, I embraced the calm before the storm and wondered, not for the first time, who would learn the bigger lesson when all was said and done. The drive back to Chicago took 6 hours, my father's sedan eating up miles of highway as suburbs gradually replaced mountains and forests. We rode mostly in comfortable silence, the radio providing a soundtrack to our thoughts. "You'll get your devices back when we reach your apartment," my father said as we approached the city skyline. "I hope you don't hold this against us forever." I watched the familiar buildings grow larger through the windshield. "I don't," I said honestly. "But we need to talk about boundaries and respect. I'm 32, Dad. Family interventions might come from love, but they're not an appropriate way to express concern." He nodded, hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "Fair enough. We could have handled it better. And I could probably handle my screen time better," I conceded. "But that has to be my choice, not something forced on me." When we pulled up to my high-rise, my father retrieved my smartphone and laptop from the trunk where they'd been secured in a lockbox for the past 2 weeks. The devices felt simultaneously familiar and strange in my hands, like meeting old friends, who had somehow changed during our separation. "Call us when you get settled?" my mother asked, hugging me goodbye. "I will, and I'll come home for Dad's birthday next month. The whole weekend, not just Saturday." Their surprised smiles made me realize how rare such a commitment had become from me. Perhaps the intervention had worked in ways they hadn't anticipated. Once, alone in my apartment, I placed my devices on the kitchen counter and surveyed my space with fresh eyes. The sleek, minimalist design that had once felt sophisticated now seemed sterile. No family photos adorned the walls, no mementos cluttered the surfaces. It was less a home than a stylish hotel suite, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. I unpacked methodically, placing my swimsuit on the bathroom counter as a reminder to find a local pool. The well-worn paperback Mystery, which I'd actually finished during the reunion, went on my otherwise digital library shelf, small totems from a different way of living. Only after everything was put away did I finally power up my smartphone and laptop. As expected, both sprang to life with a cacophony of notifications, hundreds of emails, dozens of missed calls, a barrage of text messages and app alerts. The digital world had continued its frantic pace in my absence. But the true chaos was yet to come. I attempted to check my bank account first, knowing what would happen. The website prompted me for my password, which I couldn't remember. I clicked the recovery option, which sent a verification code to my smartphone. So far, so good. But when I entered the code, the system asked for answers to security questions. I had deliberately changed to random strings before leaving Tahoe, locked out. Exactly as planned. One by one, I tried each financial account, credit cards, investment portfolio, retirement funds, bill payment services. Each attempt ended the same way: authentication failure, security lockouts, access denied. I was digitally stranded from my own finances. By evening, I had spent hours on hold with various customer service departments, explaining that I had forgotten my passwords during vacation and couldn't access my accounts. Most required identity verification that would take days to process: official letters, notarized documents, in-person branch visits with multiple forms of ID. My checking account would take 3 business days to recover. My investment accounts, with their higher security protocols, would take up to 2 weeks. Credit cards varied from 24 hours to 5 business days. Bill payments couldn't be processed until account access was restored. In short, I had successfully created the financial paralysis I'd intended. The digital fortress designed to protect my assets was now keeping me from them, all because I'd been forced to disconnect improperly. I was midway through another frustrating customer service call when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Ethan standing in the hallway, a pizza box in one hand. "What are you doing here?" I asked, opening the door. "Shouldn't you be halfway to Montana by now?" He shrugged, stepping inside. "Slight detour. Thought you might need dinner and moral support for whatever you've been planning." I blinked in surprise. "What makes you think I've been planning something?" "Please." He set the pizza on my kitchen counter. "I've known you since you were 7 and stole all the Monopoly money when no one was looking. You've got a revenge streak a mile wide." I couldn't help but laugh. "It's not revenge. It's a demonstration." "Of what?" "That you can be just as stubborn as the rest of the family, of the consequences of forcing someone off the grid without preparation." I gestured to my laptop, where a customer service chat window displayed the unhelpful script of an automated assistant. "I changed all my passwords and security questions during the reunion. Now I'm locked out of everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, investment portfolio, automatic payments. It will take weeks to fully recover access." Ethan's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You deliberately sabotaged your own finances to prove a point?" "Exactly. When Mom and Dad call tomorrow expecting me to thank them for their intervention, I'll explain that their well-meaning actions have left me unable to pay my rent, manage my investments, or access my money." I grabbed a slice of pizza, suddenly aware of how hungry I was. Maybe then they'll understand why staying connected isn't just a preference. It's a necessity in today's world. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing. "That's impressively devious. And also kind of childish." "Childish?" I nearly choked on my pizza. "They confiscated my property like I was a teenager caught smoking behind the gym. And now you're retaliating instead of communicating." He helped himself to a slice. "Two wrongs, Becca." His calm assessment irritated me. "Whose side are you on?" I wasn't aware we were taking sides in the Wilson family tech wars. He settled onto one of my sleek bar stools. "For what it's worth, I think everyone's partly right and partly wrong here." I paced my kitchen, pizza forgotten. They had no right to force me offline. I'm an adult with responsibilities, not some screen-addicted teenager. Agreed. The intervention was inappropriate and paternalistic. "Thank you, but," he continued, raising a finger, "your reaction is just reinforcing their belief that you're unhealthily attached to your technology." I stopped pacing. "How so?" "Think about it, Becca. Instead of having a mature conversation about boundaries and respect, you've engineered a financial crisis to prove how dependent you are on your devices. You're literally demonstrating addiction behavior, showing that you can't function without constant digital access." His words hit with unexpected force. Was that what I was doing? Proving their point rather than challenging it? I sank onto the stool beside him. I just wanted them to understand the real consequences of what they did. "And they should understand that," he agreed. "But there might have been ways to make your point without creating actual hardship for yourself." We ate in silence for a few minutes, the implications of my plan settling between us. Finally, I asked the question that had been nagging at me. Were you part of the intervention planning? Ethan shook his head. No. I knew they were worried about your phone usage, but the flip phone ambush was all them. I would have advised against it. Yet you didn't exactly leap to my defense when it happened. Because while their methods were wrong, their concern wasn't? He turned to face me fully. Becca, do you remember when we hiked Eagle Falls Trail last year? I nodded. I'd visited Tahoe briefly the previous summer, a quick weekend trip between client meetings in San Francisco. You took 37 photos during that hike. I counted, not of the scenery or wildlife, but of yourself, posing at lookout points, arranging your hat just so, checking each shot immediately to see if it was Instagram-worthy. I felt a flush of embarrassment, remembering. What's your point? My point is, you weren't experiencing Eagle Falls. You were documenting it, curating it, performing it. The whole time you were thinking about how it would look to others rather than how it felt to you. Another uncomfortable truth. I had spent that hike thinking about filters and captions, barely registering the actual beauty surrounding me. There's got to be a middle ground, I said quietly, between their enforced disconnect and my… whatever this is. Of course there's. Ethan's expression softened. And finding it starts with honest self-reflection, not financial sabotage. We talked late into the night, dissecting the reunion, the intervention, and my retaliatory plan. By the time Ethan left for his hotel, I had reached a decision that felt both frightening and right. The next morning, I called my parents. My mother answered, her voice bright with the expectation of gratitude for their well-intentioned meddling. Rebecca, how are you readjusting to civilization? Is everything back to normal? I took a deep breath. Actually, Mom, we need to talk. I've locked myself out of all my financial accounts. What? How did that happen? I changed all my passwords during the reunion. Deliberately. A pause. I don't understand. I wanted you and Dad to see the real consequences of forcing someone offline without preparation. In today's world, our digital lives need proper management, not abrupt disconnection. Another pause. Longer this time. You did this on purpose? To punish us? Not to punish you. To educate you. I softened my tone. Mom, I love you and Dad. I appreciate that you care about my well-being, but you can't treat me like a child and expect me to respond like an adult. My father's voice joined the call. They'd put me on speaker. So you've deliberately created problems for yourself to prove us wrong? That seems counterproductive, Rebecca. Maybe it is, I admitted. Ethan pointed that out last night, but here's what I'm proposing. I'll work on creating healthier boundaries with technology, actually choose when and how I use it instead of defaulting to constant connectivity. And you'll work on respecting my autonomy as an adult, even when you're concerned about my choices. The silence that followed felt weighted with possibility. Finally, my mother spoke. That seems reasonable. It does, my father agreed cautiously, though I'm still not clear on how you're going to handle your banking situation. I laughed, tension breaking. One day at a time with a lot of customer service calls, but I'd like to come over for dinner next weekend and talk more about this. Face to face, phones away. All of us, really present. We'd like that, my mother said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. After hanging up, I turned to my window, gazing at the Chicago skyline bathed in morning light. The city hummed with energy and possibility, always connected, always on. My smartphone sat on the counter, notifications still flooding in, demanding attention. But for the first time in years, I felt no urgency to respond immediately. The messages would wait, the emails would wait, the world would continue spinning, if Rebecca Wilson took a moment to just breathe. I picked up the well-worn mystery novel from Tahoe and settled into my rarely used armchair. The financial chaos would sort itself out eventually. the digital connections would be restored. But something had shifted inside me. A rebalancing of priorities, a recalibration of attention. They had made me use a flip phone for simplicity. I had changed all my banking passwords in rebellion. But the real change, the one that mattered, was in recognizing that true simplicity wasn't about devices or passwords or connectivity status. It was about choice, presence, intention, and perhaps a lake at dawn waiting for a diver to break its surface. 3 months after the infamous flip phone intervention, I stood in my newly redecorated apartment, surveying the changes with satisfaction. The stark minimalism had given way to something warmer. Family photos now adorned one wall in a tasteful arrangement, a hand-knitted throw from my grandmother draped over the couch, and actual books filled what had once been a purely decorative shelf. My phone chimed with a calendar alert. Digital sunset, $7 p.m. One of many new boundaries I'd established since Tahoe. After 7 p.m. on weeknights, unless there was a genuine client emergency, technology went dark. No emails, no social media, no mindless scrolling. Just analog living until morning. The financial chaos I'd created had eventually sorted itself out, though not without considerable hassle. 2 in-person bank visits, 5 notarized documents, countless hours on customer service calls, and one particularly tense meeting with my firm's IT security team later, I had regained access to all my accounts. The experience had been inconvenient and frustrating, exactly the point I'd wanted to make to my family. But it had also taught me something unexpected. Life continued even when I wasn't digitally connected to every aspect of it. The world hadn't ended when I couldn't check my investment portfolio hourly. Clients hadn't abandoned me when responses took longer than usual. The sky remained firmly in place despite my temporary digital exile. My doorbell rang at precisely 6:55 p.m. Ethan, punctual as always. Since his surprise pizza delivery the night I'd returned from Tahoe, we'd established a pattern of weekly dinners whenever he was in Chicago for business, which was increasingly often. "Perfect timing," I said, opening the door. 5 minutes to digital sunset. He grinned, holding up 2 bags of takeout from my favorite Thai place. "I come bearing provisions for your analog evening." We settled at my small dining table, another new addition, replacing the counter where I'd previously eaten hurried meals while standing. "How was Montana?" I asked, serving the pad thai. "Productive. Finished the Marshall cabin 2 weeks ahead of schedule." Ethan ran his construction business with the same efficiency I applied to finance, though with notably less digital dependency. "How's the quarterly reporting chaos?" "Managed, with boundaries intact." I nodded toward my phone, which I'd placed in a drawer as the 7 p.m. alert sounded. "No after-hours client calls this week, and Taylor is handling the Dixon portfolio review tomorrow morning so I can attend that workshop." The workshop in question was on mindfulness and productivity, something I would have scoffed at 3 months ago, but now approached with genuine curiosity. Another change in the post-Tahoe Rebecca. "Look at you, delegating like a normal human being," Ethan teased. "Next thing, you'll be taking actual weekends off." "Baby steps," I laughed. Though I did go an entire Sunday without checking work email last week. Nearly gave myself an anxiety attack, but I survived. Our conversation flowed easily through dinner, touching on family news. My parents were planning a Mediterranean cruise, professional developments, Ethan's business was expanding to Idaho, and personal projects, my newly discovered interest in film photography, a deliberately analog hobby. After dinner, as we washed dishes side by side, another activity I'd once considered an inefficient use of time, Ethan grew unexpectedly serious. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, drying a plate with unusual thoroughness. "Would you consider coming to Montana next month? There's a project I'd like your opinion on." "A construction project? I don't know anything about building." "Not exactly." He set the plate down, focusing intently on folding the dish towel. "I'm developing a retreat center on some land adjacent to my property. A place where people can disconnect intentionally, not the forced detox your parents attempted, but a guided experience with workshops on digital wellness, nature immersion, that kind of thing. I raised an eyebrow. And you want my opinion because you've lived both extremes. He met my gaze. Total digital immersion and cold turkey disconnection. Your perspective would be valuable for designing an experience that's actually helpful, not preachy or punitive. The request surprised me, but I found myself intrigued by the concept. A digital wellness retreat that doesn't demonize technology? That's actually kind of brilliant. I'm occasionally capable of good ideas, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Besides, it's a business opportunity too. Corporate retreats, burnout prevention programs. There's a growing market for this approach. Smart. The finance person in me approves. I considered my calendar mentally. When in October were you thinking? The second weekend? Fall colors should peak then. An image flashed in my mind. Montana mountains ablaze with autumn hues, crisp air, no client emergencies or quarterly reports. Just nature, perspective, and Ethan's company, which I'd come to value more than I cared to admit. I'll make it work, I decided. But I'm bringing my camera, the film one. Wouldn't have it any other way. His smile reached his eyes, creating the crinkles I'd noticed during the thunderstorm at Tahoe. It's a date. The word hung between us, its dual meaning creating a moment of charged ambiguity. A date, I echoed, not clarifying which definition. I was accepting. Later that night, after Ethan left and before I went to bed, I stood at my window gazing at the city lights. Chicago pulsed with electronic energy, millions of devices connecting people across distances both physical and emotional. I could see the building where my office was located, still illuminated despite the late hour, colleagues and competitors likely hunched over spreadsheets and reports. Once, I would have been among them, sacrificing sleep and personal time at the altar of productivity. Now, I observed from a distance, still connected to that world, but no longer consumed by it. My phone remained in its drawer, respecting the digital sunset. Tomorrow morning, I would retrieve it, check messages, respond to clients, and engage with technology as the powerful tool it was meant to be. But for these hours, I existed in a space of my own creation, connected to myself, rather than my devices. The Great Tahoe Intervention, as my family now jokingly called it, had failed in its intended purpose. I hadn't abandoned my smartphone or embraced some neo-Luddite existence, but it had succeeded in ways no one anticipated, sparking a re-evaluation that rippled through multiple areas of my life. My parents had apologized for their heavy-handed approach, acknowledging that respect for my autonomy should have come before concern about my habits. I had apologized for my retaliatory password scheme, recognizing that proving a point through self-sabotage was hardly the adult response I'd claimed to deserve. And somewhere in those mutual recognitions, our relationship had evolved. Our Sunday phone calls now lasted longer, focused on genuine conversation rather than perfunctory updates. My monthly visits home had become something I anticipated rather than obligated myself to endure. We were connecting as adults with shared history rather than as parent and child locked in outdated patterns. My professional life had transformed as well. Not dramatically. I was still a dedicated financial advisor with high standards and ambitious goals. But I had implemented boundaries that preserved my effectiveness while protecting my well-being. No client emails after 9 p.m. One device free. Day per weekend. Lunch breaks are actually taken away from my desk. Small changes with significant impact. The most profound shift, however, was internal. I had stopped living reactively, responding to every notification and demand like Pavlov's dog. Instead, I was making conscious choices about when and how to engage with both technology and people. The result was a curious paradox. By being less constantly available, I was more genuinely present when it mattered. As fall approaches, bringing with it new clients, new projects, and the promised trip to Montana, I found myself thinking often of that morning dive into Lake Tahoe. The moment when I'd stopped overthinking and simply acted. The cold shock of water, the primal joy of movement, the complete immersion in physical reality. Life wouldn't always allow for such perfect moments of presence. The digital world would continue making demands, and my career would still require connectivity and responsiveness. But I was learning to create space for both, to dive fully into professional challenges when appropriate, and to surface regularly, for air, perspective, and the human connections that technology could enhance but never replace. My grandfather had toasted his family that final night in Tahoe, calling it the most important connection of all. He wasn't wrong. But the true lesson of the flip phone summer wasn't about choosing between digital and analog, between work and family, between efficiency and presence. It was about integration rather than segregation, about bringing intention to every connection, whether mediated through screens or shared across dinner tables, about recognizing that in a world of infinite options for how to spend our attention, the choices we make define not just our days, but our lives. They had made me use a flip phone for simplicity. I had changed all my banking passwords in rebellion, but the real transformation came afterward, in the thoughtful reconstruction of habits and boundaries that neither rejected technology nor surrendered to it. As I finally turned away from the window and prepared for sleep, I felt a quiet confidence in the path forward. Tomorrow would bring its challenges and demands, its notifications and obligations. But tonight, in this moment of chosen disconnection, I was exactly where I needed to be. Present, aware, balanced on the edge of both worlds, ready to dive into whatever came next. Montana in October was a revelation. As our small plane descended toward Bozeman, the landscape unfurled below in a tapestry of amber, gold, and crimson, autumn colors intensified by the clear mountain light. I pressed my face to the window like an excited child rather than the composed financial professional I typically presented to the world. "First time flying into BZN?" asked the woman beside me, a local returning from a business trip, judging by her casual mention of getting back to the ranch. "First time in Montana." "At all," I admitted. "I'm visiting family." The description felt both true and incomplete. Ethan was family, technically my first cousin, but the anticipation fluttering in my stomach suggested complications beyond genealogy. He was waiting at the small airport, leaning against a rugged pickup truck that had replaced the rental car. He'd driven to our family reunion 6 months earlier. In jeans, flannel, and a weathered leather jacket, he looked like he'd stepped from a Montana tourism advertisement. The sight of him, relaxed, confident, entirely in his element, created a warmth that had nothing to do with the thermal jacket I'd purchased specifically for this trip. "Welcome to Big Sky Country," he greeted me, taking my weekend bag and tossing it into the truck bed with casual ease. "How was the flight?" "Scenic. Though I'm pretty sure the pilot was 12 years old." He laughed. "Regional pilots do tend to look young. Wait until you meet my contractor's apprentice. I'm pretty sure he's still working on his multiplication." Tables. The drive from Bozeman to Ethan's property near Livingston took us through valleys framed by mountain ranges, still dusted with early snow at their peaks. I had expected beautiful scenery, had seen photographs and calendars featuring Montana landscapes, but experiencing it firsthand made digital representations seem flat and inadequate by comparison. "It's so vast," I said, trying to absorb the panoramic scale. "Makes Chicago feel claustrophobic in retrospect." That's the Montana effect. Recalibrates your sense of space. Ethan navigated a winding road that followed a rushing river. First time I came out here after college, I knew I'd build something here eventually. Took 8 years of saving and planning, but worth every minute of the wait. His property, when we finally arrived, exceeded my expectations. 20 acres of mixed forest and meadow, backed by mountains and fronted by a stream that fed into the larger river we'd followed. The main house was a modern interpretation of a traditional cabin, all wood and stone and glass, designed to frame specific views and capture natural light. "You built this?" I asked, admiring the craftsmanship as he gave me a tour. "With these? 2 hands," he confirmed, then grinned. "And a crew of 12 specialists, 2 architects, and an engineer. False modesty isn't my style." "Nor is actual modesty," I teased. "But you should be proud. It's stunning work." We settled on the back deck with mugs of coffee, watching the afternoon light play across the landscape. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. I breathed deeply, feeling tension I hadn't even recognized drain from my shoulders. "So," I said, returning to the purpose of my visit, "tell me about this retreat center idea." Ethan's expression turned thoughtful. "It started as a casual observation. How many of my clients mention needing to get away from technology, but struggle to actually do it. They come to their mountain homes with the best intentions, then spend the weekends on their phones or laptops anyway." I nodded, recognizing the pattern from my own experience. Intention versus habit. Exactly. Then, after watching your experience at Tahoe, both the forced disconnection and your evolutionary response to it, I started thinking about a middle path. Not a digital detox that demonizes technology, but a place where people can learn to reshape their relationship with it. He unfolded a set of architectural plans, spreading them across the outdoor table. The proposed retreat center would be built on the adjacent property he'd recently acquired, 15 acres with similar topography to his current land. 6 private cabins, each designed for either individuals or couples, he explained, pointing to the layout. A main lodge with gathering spaces, workshop rooms and dining, trails connecting everything, leading to meditation points with particularly beautiful views. I studied the plans with professional interest. What's your target demographic? 3 main groups. Corporate teams needing rejuvenation and better collaboration skills. Individuals suffering from burnout or digital overwhelm. And families struggling with technology balance. Parents worried about their kids' screen time while battling their own digital dependencies. His market analysis was impressively thorough, identifying a growing demand for wellness experiences that addressed modern technological challenges without requiring permanent lifestyle overhauls. "The key," he continued, "is that we're not selling deprivation. We're offering perspective and practical skills. People arrive with their devices, which are gradually incorporated into intentional use patterns rather than being confiscated at the door. Unlike certain family interventions we've experienced," I noted wryly, "lessons learned. The goal isn't to create temporary phone-free zones, but to help people establish sustainable digital boundaries they can maintain after leaving." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the meadow, Ethan outlined various program components: mindfulness workshops, nature immersion activities, discussions about technology ethics, practical sessions on digital organization. "What I'm missing," he admitted, "is the financial perspective. These retreats can't be cheap given the infrastructure investment, but I want them accessible beyond just the ultra-wealthy tech executives having guilt trips about creating addictive platforms. That's where I come in, if you're willing. You understand both the corporate financial world and the personal impact of digital imbalance. Plus," he added with a sideways glance, "you're brutally honest, which I need right now more than cheerleading." I laughed. Brutal honesty, I can definitely provide. We spent the evening discussing financial models, tiered pricing structures, corporate sponsorship possibilities, scholarship programs for educators and healthcare workers. The conversation flowed seamlessly from business to personal and back. Again, fueled by a shared history and complementary perspectives. Over a dinner of locally sourced bison steaks that Ethan grilled with surprising expertise, our discussion turned more philosophical. "Do you ever wonder," I asked, swirling a glass of Montana huckleberry wine, "if we're the last generation to remember life before smartphones? Before being constantly connected was the default?" I think about it often, especially watching my sister's kids. Molly's 10 and already asking for her own phone. Tyler's 7 and navigates iPad games more intuitively than I manage my truck's navigation system. It's their native environment, I observed. We're the immigrants to the digital world. They're the first true citizens. Ethan nodded, which makes balanced perspectives like yours even more valuable. You're not anti-technology. Your career depends on it, but you've experienced both the benefits and costs firsthand. Speaking of costs, I said, steering us back to practicalities. Have you run projected operating expenses for the retreat? Staffing will be your biggest ongoing challenge. The remainder of the evening dissolved into spreadsheets and budget projections, the kind of financial analysis that would bore most people but energized both of us in different ways. Ethan's entrepreneurial vision complemented my analytical precision, creating a synergy that felt both productive and surprisingly intimate. When I finally retired to the guest room, a cozy space with windows that would frame a spectacular sunrise, I realized I hadn't checked my phone since landing in Montana. The digital sunset rule had extended naturally without effort, my attention wholly captured by more immediate experiences. The next morning, Ethan took me to see the actual retreat property. We hiked across his land and through a wooden gate in the fence line, emerging into similar terrain but with a different energy, a blank canvas awaiting transformation. Construction would start in spring, he explained as we walked the proposed building sites. Targeting a soft opening next fall, full operation by this time next year. I asked questions about zoning, water rights, contractor availability, practical concerns that demonstrated my engagement with his vision. But privately, I was also processing something more personal. The sense of possibility unfolding not just for this business venture, but between us as well. We reached a rocky outcropping overlooking a valley painted in autumn colors. The perspective was breathtaking. Mountains in 3 directions, a winding river below, and vast open sky above. Ethan had marked it on his plans as a future meditation platform. "This is my favorite spot on the property," he said, hands in his pockets as he surveyed the panorama. "I come here to think through problems, make decisions, remind myself why I left city life behind." "I can see why," I replied, genuinely moved by the vista. It puts things in perspective. That's what I want to share with retreat guests. Not just pretty views, but true perspective, the kind that helps recalibrate priorities. I turned to study his profile against the landscape, a man utterly at home in his environment, confident in his purpose. The contrast with my Chicago life felt stark yet complementary, like puzzle pieces from different sets that somehow fit together perfectly. "I have a business proposition," I said suddenly, his eyebrow raised. "Beyond the retreat center consultation, I want to invest. Personally, not through my firm." The decision crystallized as I spoke it aloud. "I believe in what you're building here, both literally and conceptually. And I have capital that could help accelerate your timeline." Ethan looked surprised, then thoughtful. "That's significant. We'd need to discuss terms, expectations, and involvement levels. Of course, I'm a financial advisor, not a fairy godmother. But I've been looking to diversify my portfolio with purpose-driven investments, and this," I gestured to the landscape surrounding us, "has purpose written all over it. It would change our relationship," he noted carefully. "Adding financial entanglement to family ties is complicated." "Our relationship is already changing," I replied with equal care. "Has been since Tahoe." The acknowledgement hung between us, neither of us quite ready to define the shifting dynamic more explicitly. Instead, we turned back to the practical, discussing potential investment structures as we continued exploring the property. By late afternoon, we'd walked every inch of the proposed retreat center grounds and developed a preliminary framework for my investment participation. The partnership felt right on multiple levels: financially sound, philosophically aligned, personally significant. As the day's light began to fade, Ethan suggested we head back to prepare for dinner. I made reservations at this place in Livingston, farm to table. Great wine list. Thought we should celebrate our new business arrangement properly. Sounds perfect, I agreed. Let me grab a quick shower first. Back at his house, as I changed for dinner, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror and paused, struck by the difference 6 months had made. The tension that had once perpetually tightened my features had eased. The reflexive reach for my phone had diminished. Even my posture seemed more relaxed, less braced against constant demands. The woman who had stormed through her family reunion demanding her confiscated devices hadn't disappeared, but she had evolved. I still valued efficiency, still thrived on solving complex financial problems, still maintained an active digital life. But technology had been restored to its proper place, as a tool rather than a taskmaster. Dinner in Livingston unfolded like a scene from a film I hadn't known I wanted to star in. The restaurant occupied a renovated historic building with exposed brick walls and soft lighting. Our table near the stone fireplace offered both warmth and privacy for conversation that wandered between business plans and personal reflections. "I've been thinking about something you said at Tahoe," Ethan mentioned as we lingered over dessert, a huckleberry cobbler that justified its own trip to Montana. "About how we can't just pretend it's 1995 anymore, how connectivity isn't optional in today's world." I nodded, remembering my frustrated outburst during the intervention. "You were right," he continued. "But I think there was truth on both sides. We can't reject technology wholesale, but we also can't surrender to it uncritically. The answer isn't in choosing between analog and digital, but in consciously integrating both. Balance through intention rather than deprivation," I summarized, recognizing the philosophy underlying his retreat center. "Exactly. And you've done that remarkably well since Tahoe. Created boundaries without walls. Found presence without disconnection." His observation warmed me more than the praise itself. Warranted. "It's still a work in progress," I admitted. "There are days when I slip back into old patterns." That's the point, though, isn't it? It's not about perfection, it's about awareness. Noticing when you're being pulled under and having the tools to resurface. Like that morning dive into Lake Tahoe, I thought. The initial shock of immersion, the deliberate movement back toward air and light. The drive back to Ethan's house was companionably quiet, the truck's headlights illuminating patches of rural darkness. Stars appeared in unprecedented numbers. Overhead, city light pollution conspicuously absent. "I'm glad you came," Ethan said as we pulled into his driveway. "Not just for the business consultation. For this." He gestured vaguely between us, seemingly unable to find the right words for the undefined connection that had been strengthening since summer. "I'm glad too," I replied. "Though I'm still mad about the flip phone." He laughed, the tension broken. "You're never going to let that go, are you? It'll make a great story someday." I paused, suddenly certain of something I'd been considering throughout the evening. Maybe even for our retreat center guests, the financial advisor who got cut off from her digital life and responded by changing all her banking passwords. First-person testimonial? His smile was curious, questioning. "I'm thinking more like co-founder perspective." Understanding dawned in his expression. "That would require more than a weekend consultation. I was thinking of quarterly visits to start." "See? How the investment develops." "Quarterly," he echoed, testing the word. "That's frequent for a passive investor." Who said anything about passive? I challenged myself. I'm thinking of an active partnership, strategic planning in Chicago, implementation visits to Montana, more frequent as construction advances. We stood in the driveway, the house dark behind us, the night sky brilliant above. Distance and proximity, professional and personal, digital and analog, dualities that no longer seemed contradictory but complementary. And after the retreat center opens, he asked quietly, then we evaluate the next steps, professionally and... I hesitated, then finished. Otherwise. His hand found mine in the darkness, a simple contact that felt more significant than any digital connection. I like the sound of otherwise, he said. Back in my Chicago apartment 2 days later, I created a new document on my laptop, a business plan for what we were tentatively calling Threshold Retreats. The name captured our philosophy, not stepping backward into some imagined pre-digital paradise, but consciously crossing between connected and disconnected states with intention and purpose. As I worked, my phone chimed with a text from Ethan. Property survey completed. Green light for spring groundbreaking. I smiled, sent a quick congratulatory response, then returned to the business plan. The digital and analog parts of my life now flowed together more naturally, each enhancing rather than competing with the other. Technology served my purposes rather than dictating my priorities. Connections, both electronic and human, enriched my days without controlling them. My parents, when told about my Montana investment venture, responded with surprised support. You're putting roots down somewhere, my mother observed perceptively. Even if it's just quarterly visits for now. She was right, I realized. Rebecca, who had resisted family ties and personal entanglements in favor of frictionless professional efficiency, was evolving. Not abandoning her strengths or ambitions, but expanding them to encompass a wider definition of success. The flip phone summer, as I now thought of it, had catalyzed changes I hadn't sought but now valued deeply. Not because my family's intervention had been right, but because my response to it had revealed truths about myself I might otherwise have missed. They had made me use a flip phone for simplicity. I had simply changed all my banking passwords in rebellion, but the real transformation had come afterward, in the intentional reconstruction of habits and boundaries that honored both connection and presence, efficiency and experience, ambition and relationship. As Montana's spring groundbreaking approached, and my quarterly visits became monthly planning sessions, I found myself living increasingly in the threshold space our retreat aimed to create, moving fluidly between digital and analog worlds with growing grace. Not perfect balance, but conscious integration. Not rejection of either realm, but thoughtful navigation of both. And if that navigation now included a deepening personal connection with a certain Montana builder, well, that was perhaps the most unexpected and welcome development of all. The story that had begun with forced simplicity and rebellious complication had evolved into something neither side could have anticipated. A genuine synthesis that honored the best of both worlds, creating something new and sustaining in the space between. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them. Now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.